In our episode tonight, our guest joins us who wrote a book that a religious experience in sports in America could be happening right before our eyes and all through history. Art Remillard is up in just a moment to tell us all about it.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And welcome to another edition where we get to talk to an author about a recent book they've had out. It's got some football themed items in it and sports galore. The gentleman's name is Arthur Remillard, and he's joining us today. Arthur, welcome to the Pig Pen.
Oh, it's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Looking forward to talking all things football.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the advanced copy of the book. I read it. I really enjoyed it. And we got a lot to talk about because you really unpacked a lot of sports history and a lot along your theme of your book in the pages here in just a short amount of pages. Really, it was a great read and a quick read, and I recommend it to everybody. But why don't you tell us maybe a little bit what the basic theme of the book is and give us the title and where folks can get it.
Right. So the book is called Bodies in Motion, A Religious History of Sports in America. And what I wanted to do was understand the ways in which sports have taken on certain religious characteristics through time, have assumed sort of sacred meanings, without going so far as to say that sports is our new religion. And we can get into that a little bit. I bristle a little bit at that one. But I think for the purposes of this podcast, it's probably worth saying that my entry point into this whole conversation was football. And I went to graduate school at Florida State University, and I was not an FSU fan or anything like that. I just was going to school there, and I saw, just the mania around that team. I'm close to Penn State. I understand college football mania, but boy, this was just another level. Somebody rolling in on Thursday with their $1 million RV that has all the garnet and gold all over the place. And at one point, I was in a discussion, and the mascot came up. It's the Florida State Seminoles. And I saw people get really, really fired up immediately. And I thought, oh, wow, I'm studying things now. I'm in graduate school, and specifically Emil Durkheim, who's a sociologist who understood who wanted to try to understand religion beyond kind of institutional forms. And he really focused on what he called sacred things. And the best characterization of what Durkheim meant by this was from another sociologist who framed it as something that is deeply cherished and violently defended. And I said, whoa, that's this mascot. And so that led me down the road to writing about the history of the conflict over this mascot and the various directions that went, and it just sort of snowballed from there. So yeah, absolutely, football is kind of where my entry point has been to look at sports more generally through time.
Yeah, it's it's a fascinating subject, and it's one that's really popped up a few times, more than a few times here on this podcast. We just talked before we came on, your familiarity, and you even had a recommendation from Dr. Randall Balmer, who was our guest not too long ago, a year or two ago, on his book, which had a similar theme, but much different subject matter. So I didn't see any crossover other than some of the themes and the points that you made. And we've had some other guests that talked about some of the iconology of the football helmet and the emblems on the football helmet and what it's going to symbolize. It. So it's very, very interesting. And I mean, I'm a Christian man myself, and so I recognize the characteristics, but I was so oblivious until you recent guests have come on here and really pointed out to me that, oh my gosh, this really is have a lot of parallelisms to sports fandom and religion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's really a very kind of common and natural thing to see the connection. And I think it does come down to the enthusiasm, the interest. And I mean, look, you can see, like you were saying, sacred images. Again, when I was down at Florida State, they don't call their mascot a mascot, call it a symbol, right? This isn't a mascot. And the the logo that they have, there's a lot of care and protection of this logo. And these things on their own are not significant, right? There's no sort of utilitarian value to them. But people invest a lot of meaning to it. So, if I walked into the practice area of the football team and I decided to go stomping on the logo, that wouldn't end well for me. You know, I
Right.
learned that really quickly. And and this was again my entry point was that there were people, outside of the Florida State sort of circle who were raising questions about the appropriateness of this particular mascot. And I the amount of vitriol that would come toward them was something. And this is sort of pre-internet. This is pre-social media. I had written something for the local newspaper at that time, really just trying to describe the backstory on who Chief Osceola was and how he died, which he was captured. The specifics are kind of probably going to be a little foggy in my mind. It's been a while since I've done this, but he was captured and sort of lured in on a truce flag, and then they captured him, and eventually he died, and they removed his head. This was something that happened at this point. And they put his head in a jar, and it was kind of like this war trophy. And so for years in St. Augustine, there was Osceola's head in a pharmacy, in the window of a pharmacy. And so, some of the objections were when I'm looking at this logo and I see, the head of an indigenous person sort of encircled like this, right? This is sort of reminiscent of this. Do you want to think about that? And so I had sort of brought that up. And again, this is pre-social media. I was getting all sorts of hate mail. Like, oh, okay, I touched a nerve.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, when you're talking about the emblem thing, it almost made me think about a few decades ago, maybe it's been longer ago than that, when I think it was Terrell Owens was playing for the 49ers at the time and playing in Dallas's stadium and
Hmm.
scored a touchdown, ran to the center field, spiked the ball on the star. And,
Hmm. Hmm.
a few years later, he's wearing a Cowboys uniform, which is kind of ironic in itself. But yeah, people were very upset about that, him spiking that ball on their emblem in the middle of the field.
Yeah, and I mean to kind of give you an example closer to home, I can't remember the exact year, 2008 or 9, I think it was, and the Steelers were playing against the Tennessee Titans, I believe it was.
Hmm.
And one of the players from the opposite side, after they had won the game, like I think he blew his nose into the terrible towel and stomped on it or something. And
Yeah.
this was just like outrage, right? And then I think that particular player, he ended up getting hurt a little bit later, and the Titans lost their next game, and then they started the next season. They lost a couple games. And in Pittsburgh, the story was that's the curse.
Yeah.
That, like the curse of the towel. That's what you get, right?
It was maybe even more obvious. TJ Houshmandzadeh, who's playing for the Cincinnati Bengals, they were playing a game, a playoff game. The
Mm,
Steelers were at Cincinnati,
mm.
and Cincinnati looked like the start of the game they were on fire, scoring like crazy. Houshmandzadeh takes the terrible towel, shines his shoes with it, and Carson Palmer gets injured like on the next play, and the Steelers go on and win the playoff game. And yeah, again, the curse of the towel. You got it. Myron Cope is getting his vengeance on you for that.
Absolutely. I mean, the terrible towel is a great example, especially around here for when I'm talking about this. I always start with it, right? And I always start
Hmm.
with that kind of like, what if I walked into a Steelers bar and I blew my nose into this, right? Like, ooh, right? Like the flinches that happen, just somebody thinking about that.
Yeah,
And I
the
mean,
hairs on
this
the
is
back of my neck are a little off right now.
right. I mean, people wrap their newborn children in this. Myron Cope, he had a whole like blanket of these on his coffin when they laid him to rest. They take these all over the world. I always talk about, I've lived in my life halfway across the world, halfway across America. I've lived, in a lot of different places. Every place I have ever lived, there has been a Steelers bar. it, it-
Yeah.
you know, that community has spread out and there is an intensity in that community that is pretty impressive.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to blow your nose on it because you never know who's watching. Yeah, I agree with you. I've been, I'm a Steelers fan. I've, traveled across the country. I was in Phoenix and I got off a plane and there's somebody in the Phoenix airport wearing Steelers gear. And I'm like going,
Hmm.
so, I mean, it felt like a home, that was kind of nice. But
Right.
yeah, so, I mean, your book is not just about football. As a matter of fact, it's probably more of other sports in there, but
Hmm.
you have some great instances of football to bring about. But one, and with the I wish this was called Pugilism Dispatch because one of your stories in the beginning of the book was
Hmm.
about a young African American fighter, and that really resonated with me. And I mean, you really grabbed my attention as a reader by
Yeah.
introducing this gentleman. Maybe you could just talk about him briefly and his story.
I love this story. I love this story because one of the things I wanted to do was start to thinking about, when America was founded, right? When we had the revolution and then we had the founding and we had everything like that. One of the things that had to happen was is that communities had to figure out who they were. And we do that in part by saying, who are our heroes? Who are the people we look up to? Who are the ones who really stand apart? And in early America, George Washington was a big hero. He was a big heroic figure for all that he had done and all that he had represented. I mean, the statues and the speeches and all the things about Washington. Yes, absolutely. But there were other heroes of the age coming from other populations. We have a large and growing enslaved population at this time. And the story that you're referencing, Tom Melno, this is a really interesting one. So the story goes that he's an enslaved person, and his father was a boxer and he was a boxer, and the person who owned the plantation had set up a fight between him and a neighboring plantation. Tom Malno wins the fight and thereby wins his freedom and then goes off to New York. It's a great story of sports and liberation and things like that. Not necessarily backed by the historical record, but it's become part of the mythology of Tom Mulno. So he goes to New York. He becomes the champion of America, but he realizes the money's to be made over in England. And so he goes over, and when he gets to London, there is a new kind of new kinds of journalism starting. Pierce Egan is the name of the person, the Plutarch of prize fighting, as he would be called. He starts to write about the colorful figures, about the events, about just the mania of this lovely sport that's all across London. And Tom Malno is an object of fascination for not just Pierce Egan, but like just all of London is really interested in this American hero, right? This is how Pierce Egan is understanding this person. And sort of the high point of Tom Malno's story is that he's finally is able to get a fight against the champion, who is Tom Cribb. And these were rough fights. These were rough. I mean, these were bare knuckle. It was knockdown, drag out fights, and there's all kinds of stories about what happened during this. But at the end of the day, the folks in London didn't want an American or a Black American to be taking this crown. And there's stories of the crowd rushing in, of once Melno looks like he's going to win, they stop him. um, but it's a great story about how the idea of an American hero takes a different form than what we normally know and unfolds in a different place, right? We're really not that far removed from the revolution at the time that he's over in England. So all of those international tensions are playing out in these fights. And certainly there's a racial dimension and all these other things. And so, yeah, I really loved kind of getting into the details of that story. I'm glad you picked that one up.
Yeah, like you said, there were so many facets to it, and being, a 200-year-old plus story,
Yeah.
and just having so many elements of modern society in
Hmm.
it that I would have never guessed in a million years that could have happened 200 years ago.
Yeah. And
So
Malno becomes a kind of point of reference for years after. I mean, 100 years after, almost 100 years after he's fighting in England, there's another black fighter in the United States who becomes the champion, Jack Johnson.
mhm.
He beats Tommy Burns over in Australia. And this is at the height of Jim Crow America, right? Where we have segregation that's really tightening its grip. And there were real questions about whether or not interracial boxing should even happen. And at some point, Jack Johnson's talent was such that, boy, the sports fighting public, they really wanted to see him. They really wanted to see him against the best. And so he wins the championship. And that's when, in 1910, July 4th, 1910, one of the great sports moments in American history, I would argue, was a fight with Jim Jeffries and Jack Johnson. Jim Jeffries was the former champion. He had retired. He had gone to California, but he ran out of money. And the whites prize fighting fan just they could not let him go, right? They thought he was the quote unquote great white hope. That's where that term sort of emerged from. And he got thumped. Jack Johnson just absolutely thumped him. One of the sports writers there was actually Jack London, the great writer. And his account was just like, oh boy, yeah, no hope, right? No hope here. But Tom Melno became a point of reference. When Jack Johnson was fighting, that those stories kind of meshed, and then they sort of moved forward. And in later generations, when Muhammad Ali comes along, he's looking at Jack Johnson, who was this brash, fast talking, didn't care, would just offend the sensibilities of everybody and flaunt it, right? There's that kind of line that you can see from Tom Melno to Muhammad Ali, right? It is really kind of interesting when you start to connect all those dots.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I guess you helped segue me into the next topic I wanted to talk about is you go chronologically, hard for me to get that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you go up into the roaring 20s, the
Hmm.
golden age of sports, and you
Hmm.
get into some of, you're talking about Jack London, but you have some of these journalists that are
Hmm.
writing, before him that are, really setting the stage for modern day sports writing. And the
Absolutely.
Grantland Rices, and you also had Francis Wallace. And maybe you could
Yes.
just maybe you could just tell some of the parallelisms you have with Grantland Rice and some of his prose, and get into Mr. Wallace as well.
Yeah, I love that you picked up on that because that was a great story for me. Um, y- you know, I read this book after I kind of got through. I don't know if you read uh, The Mosquito Bowl by Buzz Bissinger.
Hmm. I did.
Yeah. So I was in the Marine Corps, and so I was really interested in
Oh,
this
thank you
because
for
I
your
served at.
service.
Oh, thanks. I did 2 years over in Okinawa. And so I was really interested to read this. But one of the things that Bissinger really emphasized was how well the Marine Corps used media and print media in particular. Like they were really good about getting journalists who could tell a story in a way that made the Marine Corps look like the Marine Corps that we know, right? The thing that drew me in, the uniforms, just the mystique of it, right? That was building at the same time as you had people like Francis Wallace and Grantland Rice writing about sports. So I was like, whoa, right? What a neat connection about, journalism and the way in which journalism developed at roughly the same time. But yeah, Grantland Rice really liked to put a flair on sports and emphasize that his job was making heroes. Right? He said, if you're not making heroes, then what are we even doing? Right? And so he's the one who is putting a spotlight on Babe Ruth, on Ty Cobb, on these great athletes of the era. Francis Wallace, I really like because that story tells you the story of American Catholicism at this time. Right? So it's hard for us now 100 years removed to understand just how marginal American Catholics were in the 19 teens and 1920s. And so when you get Notre Dame starting to rise up and become a force in college football, it's a way in which Catholics are presenting themselves in this very American way, right? Muscularity and strength and everything else, and doing so on a football field against the best Protestant and secular teams of the time. And so that level of legitimacy that is owed to him. So you had people like Francis Wallace really kind of amping this up, making Newt Rockne a heroic figure. And then, in the midst of that, you have a fairly infamous clash with the Klan. The Klan was very prominent in Indiana at this time, and they had a march in South Bend. And of course, the Notre Dame students weren't too happy about it. There were a lot of confrontations. Some of the football players were involved in this, and this is where that moniker, the Fighting Irish, starts to emerge. in the initial, the administration at the time, they didn't really like that term. They thought that played into stereotypes, but Francis Wallace was like picking it up and using it. And it's that whole thing of you take something that's meant to be an insult, you make it a badge of honor. Well, that's what happened. After a couple of years, it starts to become this thing. And then the Fighting Irish becomes this very Catholic team. I mean, they do very Catholic things, but on a national stage, and really kind of expands what American pluralism means through this really unique combative sport.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Notre Dame fan,
Okay.
and I've been lifelong, and I had never realized that there had been such, a disparity during the era of Knute Rockne and the Four Horsemen. You're talking,
Hmm.
1924. It's almost a riotous situation,
Yep.
and even, one of the Four Horsemen, Harry Stuhldrayer,
Yep.
you have, they were throwing potatoes at light bulbs, I believe, in your book. And Stuhldrayer is the one that knocks out the final light bulb to,
Yep.
put
Yep.
Notre Dame's point across that,
Absolutely.
against their adversaries here. So that was something I'd never heard before, and I love learning something new, especially about a team that I thought I knew a lot about.
Yeah, they were a big that was a big deal, and I think that again, it's really important to understand um, the way in which sports kind of makes these ways for pioneers. One of the chapters that I wrote to make their way. One of the stories that I mean, shifting to a different sport that I always tell is Hank Greenberg. He's like if I could go back in time and meet anybody, I think I'd want to meet Hank Greenberg. I really believe, and historians kind of I don't know that they necessarily agree with me on this. I really believe they stopped pitching to him because they didn't want him to get Babe Ruth's record. You know, I really believe that. But he was in a time and in a place. He's in Detroit, and you've got Henry Ford putting out the Protocols of Elders Design. You've got Father Coughlin just doing his thing on the radio. There was a lot of anti-Semitism, and I think he did so much to push back on that. Just the fact that he was Hammer and Hank, he was this muscle man, like who could just he was a power hitter. He was important to the team, and then people learned about Judaism through him. What it is, and then he was in World War II, like so many of these guys, right? And then the scene that I keep coming back to again. I wish I was there. Was when Jackie Robinson had just come into the league and they came to Pittsburgh. And at this point, you had Hank Greenberg was part of Pittsburgh. He had finished off his career there, and he was playing first base, and the two had collided on first base. And Jackie Robinson, he's getting all these taunts. It's a bad scene. And afterward, Greenberg checked in on him, make sure he was okay, and just said, "Hey, you know what? Stay, hang in there. You're gonna be all right." And this is a guy who's been through it. Greenberg, he had been through it,
Right.
and there was such a bond between those two from that. And I thought, wow, like what a what a great story, what a powerful story, what a testament to the character of both of these people and what they meant. Again, to kind of expanding the moral map of what America is and could be.
Yeah, especially from two different races, two different
Yeah.
growing up differently, looking differently, and but to have the same empathy for each other because they, really had the same troubles, that they've
Mm-hmm.
gone through their lives and
Mm-hmm.
their lives in baseball. So yeah, that was pretty powerful. Your story on him too, as you touch on so many different athletes, and folks, you really got to get a copy of the book and get into this, because there are some athletes that I have never heard of. And like I said, I read quite a few sports books, and
Mm-hmm.
I really got to enjoy some stories, not only about the football that I didn't know, but especially, some of, the women's sports and
Mm-hmm.
people that lived, a century ago, or early 20th century. And you have, you have them by the dozens coming out in the pages of this book, which is really intriguing. And they
Yeah.
all carry that central theme of you proving your point. Where are we going with sports? I think is sort of what I got out of it. Is
Mm-hmm.
that sort of the message that you're
Sure.
wanting to?
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly a big part of it. Like, what do these things mean to us? And it 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 can certainly take us into difficult places. By the end, I get into the story of, I look into icons, sports icons, which was really that was one of my favorite chapters to write because that that has not been a framing that we've used for sports until fairly recently. As I kind of understood it, you start to have this language of sports icon emerging at the same time that we have digital technologies emerge, right? On our digital devices, we have icons. That's
Mhm.
the language that we started to use. And we use these icons to create images and to mass produce these images. And so we get people like Michael Jordan. You go anywhere in the world, and if you see that, that image of Air Jordan that Nike popularized,
Mhm.
you know who it is. You can't see the face. It's just an image, right? And so I love telling the story of the way in which corporations stepped in and elevated images. I mean, think of all the great images that we have of Tiger Woods. His, iconography, the iconic red shirt that,
Red
weekend
shirt on
golfers,
Sundays.
right, the weekend warriors would wear just to kind of like mimic and be in the presence of this. And the story that really stuck out to me was Lance Armstrong, because I didn't appreciate until I started writing this book just how much people revered him. Not just for the bike stuff, but for everything that his cancer story told. Because we've
Mhm.
we've all been touched by this. And to kind of
Right.
have somebody who really rises up and overcomes that it's a powerful story. And he meant so much to so many people that they really held on to it until the bitterest of bitter ends,
Mhm.
right? And then,
Mhm.
he goes on Oprah and everything starts to unravel and the shine comes off. And I think that a lot of the people who had commented on him said, wow, right? Like it was right in front of me the whole time and I
Mhm.
didn't want to see it. And I think that that's always the tension that we have in sports. I refer to it early as the Alypius problem. So who is Alypius? So if you go to St. Augustine, there's a story of him teaching, and there's this young man, Alypius, who really loves the circus. It's these sort of games, these really brutal games that they would go and watch. And, Augustine's like, that's really not good for you to do. And he's like, okay, I'm going to quit going to the games. I'm going to quit going to the circus. But then his friends cajole him. And he goes, he says, okay, I'm going to go, but I'm not going to watch. I'm going to cover my eyes. He covers his eyes, but he starts to hear all the noises of the circus. And then he can't hold back anymore, right? He's drawn in. And so I call that the Alypius problem because that was the thing that the Puritans were really worried about. They understood that sports had value. I mean, like beyond utilitarian stuff. Yes, sports can get you, prepared for war. They can make men strong. They can or all these things that they had an understanding of that, but they also understood that there was something to sports that was just valuable to the human being. But they worried about if it would take over. And I think that push and pull plays out all through American history, that we're always worried about, in the early 20th century, the baseball craze, that this is taking us away. This is a distraction. This is bringing us to ball fields on Sunday instead of church.
Mhm. Mhm.
The marathon craze at around the same time. You had at the Olympics, oh goodness, John Kelly, um, winning a gold medal. I'm sorry, Johnny Hayes, winning a gold medal, the first American to win in 1908, and this sparks this marathon craze, and you have people looking at this saying, "Is yes, endurance is a value, but that is too much. That's extreme." And young men shouldn't be doing this. This is too much, right? And so there's always that again that push and pull there.
Hmm. Yeah, it's you I love it when a book makes me think when I put it down. And your book, having read it recently, has really made me think a lot this week. I'll take it back to my Steelers fandom,
Hmm.
the tradition and
Right.
how you can't break tradition. And I found it really interesting, and you made me think about it in a different way. This week, the Steelers revealed what their throwback uniforms are going to be, which
Mm,
is a very close variation of their original season. It's very in
yeah,
1933 as the Pittsburgh Pirates when they took the field.
yeah,
Art Rooney designed a jersey, and
yep.
they had to change some things. They had, the emblem in 1933 was right smack dab in the middle. Now they have to have a number there, so they sort of
Oh,
put it off the side on the chest. But people are up in arms over that uniform and the
yeah.
Bumblebee uniform that came a couple years afterwards, which they had, a decade ago on. And I'm sitting here thinking they're fighting that, you can't break the tradition, but the tradition, this is what started the Steelers organization. This is
Yeah,
more traditional than what they wear now. But
yeah,
it's amazing how people, get into that path of, you know, idolizing the uniform and identifying with the uniform, I guess maybe the better word.
yeah,
And then when you try to take them off that path, it's difficult to
yeah,
do. So
yeah,
I thank you for making me think about things outside the box, outside the story of your
yeah.
book, because it's happening everywhere in sports. So
I think, with the Pittsburgh example, that's a great thing because I think I've noticed that same thing, that the tradition is very important, and it will be the thing that really people cling to because the nature of the game has changed so much
mhm,
since the 1970s, the original, the dynasty when that starts, where I mean these guys lived in town. They had summer jobs. They lived the life. I mean, they were professional athletes, but they lived the life that was similar to the people who lived there. That's not the case now, right? They don't, free agency and there's all sorts of things and there's lots of money. But I think that the fan expectations have shifted. And it's like, okay, like that was how we attached to the team then. We're gonna we're gonna change that now, and we're gonna it's the team, it's the tradition that's important. The individuals come and go, but the team and the tradition is the thing that we're really kind of clinging to. And I'm just shooting from the hip here. I guess this is something that, as we're talking, is just popping into my head. It's a very Catholic city,
mhm.
right?
Yeah, that's true.
And this is, the whole understanding of apostolic succession is that the authority of the priest comes from this unbroken lineage that goes back to the apostolic succession, right? And the tradition is what matters. The individuals, yes, they are couriers and everything else and important figures in this, but the institution and what it represents is the thing that you are ideally, right, supposed to cling to. And kind of not to make too much of that, but right, our Protestant friends might bounce around because I don't like that minister. I don't like how they're doing things. I'm going to go over here, right? I don't
Hmm.
I don't know if I want to make too much of that comparison. Um, but boy, you wonder about if the Catholic character of a city sort of grafts on to how people kind of connect to team. Who knows?
That could be, it's in the DNA, so they
Yeah,
say
right.
the Yinzer DNA. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, very interesting. Or why don't you give us again the title of your book, where folks can get it?
Sure. The title is Bodies in Motion, A Religious History of Sports in America. You can get this anywhere where you buy books online, especially Amazon or Barnes& and Noble or even the Oxford University Press website.
Yeah, well, Art, we really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your book with it. First of all, writing the book and sharing the sports history with us, coming on here on our podcast and sharing your book with us. And, I'm sure the readers will be or the listeners will be very excited to become your readers and, enjoy this book too. And
Yeah.
we sure appreciate you having you here today.
No, thank you. It's great talking to you.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.